Welcome to Verified, the social commerce podcast. I'm David Vanderveen.
And I'm Peter Griscom. And in this episode, we're going to dive deep into what this podcast is all about, why we built it, and why we think social commerce needs a show like this right now.
Each week we're going to be coming up with interviews with operators because the social commerce podcast for us is all about talking to operators, listening to what they're working through, and finding out what's coming next. But Peter, I think the big question for anyone just tuning into this right now is, why do I care? Why do I care about what you two guys are talking about? Tell me a little bit about yourself. How did Peter Griscom get here right now?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Why listen to us? Well, you and I both have, I would say, very varied backgrounds. I got started off as an entrepreneur, like many others, starting a business when I was just in college in the direct-to-consumer space. Don't worry, the internet existed when I started this company. We were selling online, but we were also selling predominantly retail. I was fortunate enough to grow that business, sell that business, and then also get into the contract manufacturing side of consumer packaged goods, and then back into the brand building side, both with private and public companies. So a lot of experience on the operating side, but also investing in growing companies, but predominantly in companies also that are going through challenges. So because of that, I've kind of got a unique perspective on how to solve the problems that are becoming ever more apparent in today's AI-first, rapidly evolving CPG landscape. But what about you? I mean, your background is far more interesting than mine. Tell me why you're here.
I don't know if it's more interesting. It's certainly pretty varied. Peter, I'm a little older than you. I'm not sure if I'm wiser, but I'm certainly older. My wife and I have a block print on the wall that says "We met before the internet." And I started as an entrepreneur. I think it's by vocation in the '80s. Have always had something going on for myself. When I turned 22, my dad said to me, he was a head and neck specialist with a large private practice. He said, "You're off my taxes now. You need to have your own business, whether it's profitable or not." And so I always had something going on, whether I was an employee or doing my own thing. But for me, I think where a lot of my success came from and the way it really correlates to social commerce was in 2001, I helped co-found a brand called Excess Energy Drink and Sports Nutrition. We were the first sugar-free energy drink, the first ones to do flavors, first ones to do mega doses of B12, and really kind of differentiated ourselves from the core energy drink market into something that was better for you. We pioneered the whole zero concept. And in 2008, we shifted from a lot of in-person sampling and physical events to really focusing on Facebook when that was a big hot thing. And realizing that the reason that we were doing events wasn't necessarily just for the people in the room, but it was to include everybody that couldn't be there, and made a huge shift. We're some of the first people to do Facebook Lives, obviously transitioned to Instagram and TikTok and other places later. But I think for me, it was such an incredible opportunity, particularly when the algorithms were more open, to be able to, create a lifestyle brand that you could reach people that couldn't even be with you in person and get so much more reach and engagement. When we ended up scaling that business to more than 60 countries. And I remember when we were launching in mainland China in 2018, we were one of the first brands to actually do pool parties. So we would, have these municipal pools, kind of gray boxes that we would dress up, bring in DJs. The mainland China government only allows you to have limited people participating, so maybe a few thousand people. But we could broadcast over 10 million live on Weibo and WeChat. So it was always figuring out ways to integrate social commerce into the other things that we were doing. I think the early omnichannel days, and now that social commerce has become more pure, DTC has become the first mover in the space. It's something that I've kind of shifted into over time, but something that I've been around and participating in through the whole process. So I think for you and me, look, we're both operators, we're founders. We've worked at big companies, we've worked in public companies, private companies. We've been on boards. We've done a lot of it. I don't know if we've done it all, but we've done a lot of it. And I think we have our own unique takes, and hopefully that's why people chime in and listen to this.
Yeah, absolutely. For you, tell me this. I know you guys had so much experience with social at XS and even more sense with some of the other businesses as well. What are some of the things that are, common mistakes or learnings that you've seen over the years that you think, hey, not a lot of people are covering this, and we want to give these this information on this podcast?
Well, I think right now, it's nothing static, right? This is the most dynamic, constantly changing landscape, I think, of any business environment I've ever seen. And I was lucky enough to work with Danny Young, David Beckham, the whole team at IM8, taking them from pre-launch through, post over $100 million in revenue, probably closer to $200 million run rate right now. And which was my role. I like to come in, help people get out of the weeds, get moving, be a supporting role on the board and as the president of the Americas with IM8. And I think what I'm seeing right now is there are a lot of, and if you're younger, it's almost better. Less experience is almost less reasons to be concerned about how new and fresh everything is, because some of us coming in with experience, we have to learn quickly that the experience might be holding us back. I mean, I think the experience is useful because there's the blocking and tackling of business that a lot of us have under our belts, but we also have to realize you don't necessarily have to do everything the way you used to. When we launched IM8, we launched in 31 countries. And in the old days, if I was launching excess in 31 countries, I'd have to be registered and in market and making it in there before I could launch. These days, with e-commerce laws, you can actually ship to 31 countries if you're making it in the United States before you even start, as one example. It's the use of AI, the way we can create these workflow loops that continually monitor and help us manage our workflow processes from revenue through manufacturing, et cetera. I think there's so much change and shift going on that one of the best things we can do, and the reason that I thought Social Commerce Summit, Social Commerce News was so important, was because it creates a community, a network where we can share information and help each other, rise the tide and lift all boats. So yeah, I'm excited about what I'm seeing. I love being sort of a fly on the wall in a lot of these conversations, as well as an operator myself, and continuing to be on boards and creating strategic advice. How about you, Peter?
Yeah, for me, I think, you nailed a lot of the things that are a challenge, right? That we have to unlearn these habits of how long things take or what categories to avoid. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities that are presenting themselves because of live shopping, because of the growth of TikTok shopping, in-platform shopping, that I would have told anybody to stay away from those categories based on personal experience. Hey, don't go start a beverage in a can because you have to penetrate C-stores and it's all about how many doors you get. And now you see companies launching on social and just killing it out of the gate, and then going to convenience and grocery and specialty later. And so the playbook has definitely shifted, and I think it's critical for new operators and experienced operators to take in those learnings that we can distill from talking to other founders, but also from our broad-based experience, and then also just really getting into what's actually working. I think it's really wonderful to hear the stories of how people got started and the interesting story behind their business, but I'm more interested in what's working in their business now. And I know you and I both, as operators, hey, tell me what your playbook is today. Tell me what's
Absolutely.
happening in your
Yeah.
business today. And I think that's a gap, and I think we get to address that, which is really exciting. And I think any founder that comes on knows they need to talk real revenue, they need to talk real statistics, they need to get into their real numbers and their real playbooks, because we have real questions, because we've been there, we've done that.
This is why it's verified, right? I mean, I think it's the Wild West right now in terms of what's possible, but also what people are doing and how people are reporting it. I think you and I have been around the block long enough, particularly if you've been at a public company. I always say, look, promise bunts, deliver base hits. If you hit home runs, the stock will respond. But if you promise a triple and you deliver a double, even though a double is a really good thing to do, people are going to think you failed. Always under promise, always over deliver. There's still some folks figuring out that over promising isn't their friend because they think hype sells. There's a point where it does to maybe some immature investors or people who maybe shouldn't be on your cap table. But I think when we're talking to the big boys and people who know what they're doing, they can do the math on their own. They don't need us hyping it up. And that's why I think verified is so important. You're the numbers guy, Peter. I'm more of like the culture and branding. Tell me about your approach to verified by the numbers. Like, how are we verifying things?
For me, it's really getting into looking at their actual platform, whether it be, Shopify, whether it be TikTok sales, whether it be what you're doing on Amazon, or let's talk about your retail sales. Getting into the real numbers and actually having the guests or the operators come and show us what's actually going on in a specific area of their business, really opening it up and saying, hey, here's what's really happening. And here are the things that we tried that didn't work. Here are the things that we tried that did work by the numbers. Here's what our LTV to CAC is. And let's get into the real nitty gritty of what the ad cost is, and what you're paying your creators to talk about your product, and how many creators are you paying. And I think that's something that new operators, but also, like I said, experienced operators, big brands, they want to know, because they want to go and put that back in and say, okay, if they did this, then we can do it. And here's how we're going to follow that playbook to some extent. When we look at that, combining that with the culture, combining that with getting the product right, those things that we're talking about, combining that with being in the business and passionate about the business, all those things that we get to talk about, you get to really bring out on them, because that's something so well, having led such incredible growth at XS, and then also, again, being involved in such amazing growth at IM8 and investing in some really cool companies as well. I'm excited about that. And I think, too, from my perspective, this content really doesn't exist today. And I think, from my perspective, I'm tired of a lot of the tell me the happy go lucky story. I want to get into the data. But tell me this, when you look at the social commerce environment right now, you look at the content that's out there, that's the things that are being covered. What are you excited about? What are you excited to bring out from your perspective that you're not seeing?
Well, I think connecting the dots. I started early in my career. I started in politics, and particularly I was booking media, um, and a lot of earned media. So doing interviews, creating stories that you could then go sell to radio and TV and the old terrestrial kind of platforms. And the best thing about starting in politics is you get graded every day on real results. So, there's polling that's going on. You're looking at results in each market where you're trying to pass. In my case, it was around term limits. We were passing term limit laws all over the country. And the thing that that surprised me when I got into branding later, and a lot of the stuff happened in my 20s, is I didn't realize that when people were doing brand spend, they weren't really being measured. It was pretty like vague in terms of the value it was creating for a brand, and that's because a lot of brands were being standing on shelves, and so you're trying to create awareness, and that's why that wasn't wrong. It was just very different. I think what I'm seeing now, at least from my point of view, or what resonates with me, is that like with IM8, we spend almost nothing on brand, but everything goes into performance marketing, and that really is our brand spend, which reminds me a lot of how we got started. I got started in politics, and then how we focus a lot of our spend at XS. And so it's nice to see that come full circle. And what I love to see, and I saw this a lot with energy drinks, people would see Red Bull, who had already scaled over a few $100 million before we started. They would see them with these big, air campaigns, the famous athletes, the really cool events. And a lot of brands, when they launched energy drinks, would really kind of confuse a ground war and an air war. The ground war is your performance. In beverage, it's about distribution, sales, being on the ground, making sure it gets to the customers. Some of the worst things you can do is have an air war, but not have the product be available to people. That shifted. I think we're going to talk to, for example, Ben Whitty about this, where you could actually build a brand via direct to consumer. We did that with XS very, very early on. And then, people like Ben have done it with Recess, using Amazon as a platform. But I think the idea of connecting the dots between what you're doing in terms of performance marketing, using creators, using nano influencers, micro influencers, ambassadors, et cetera, using these social media platforms back to revenue. Like, where is the conversion on this? I don't really, let's be honest, I don't really care. I'll say it nicely. I don't really care what your awareness is, or what your likes are, or what your engagement is. What I care a lot about is how's that conversion working? Now, it all has to work together. And if you have broad engagement and broad awareness, you can probably be more effective at driving conversion, but you still got to drive conversion. It has to get to revenue. You can't leave revenue out of the picture. I also think if people just focus on revenue, sometimes they make big mistakes in the culture and the core business, so that you have a sustainable long-term brand that people are going to stick around and want to be a part of, because it's transforming their life somehow, changing behavior. So those are the things that matter to me. I think together, you and I talking about this from both ends, we're going to get to the middle. Maybe we should call this finger cuffs, but but it'll be a lot of fun, and we'll keep it lively, and it's definitely not going to be boring. I know that. So can't wait to get into this.
I also think having those interviews with actual operators, whether it be somebody, to your point, a creator, a builder, those type of people are going to give us a unique perspective on not just how they built the brand, but also what they're struggling with now. To your point, what are the failure points? What are the things that are working and not working? And what do the numbers look like? Why is it working? Why is it not working? So I think that's really exciting. I think we're going to have obviously new episodes every week, which is a great cadence. And we're going to have lots of great guests. And you can find us on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, you name it. So I'm excited about that. I think if there was one question we should get every guest to answer that nobody ever asked, what do you think that would be, David? I'm racking my brain trying to think of the one great question, but I don't know that I've got one.
For me, one of my favorite questions that I was asked one time, I was on a boat with Byron Roth from Roth Capital, good friend, and he had a new CIO, Chief Investment Officer, who was brand new. And we're on this beautiful boat in Miami and cruising around having a great day. And he said to me, he goes, David, how'd you get here? And I looked at him, I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure if I understand the question. Like, how did I get to the dock today? Or he goes, no, like, how did you end up getting invited on this boat today in less than 5 minutes? And so it's sort of like a quick life, like snapshot of your journey. I love to hear the journey. I love to hear how somebody got to the point in time that they are today. And I like to hear, and what I look for isn't just the success points, because success is never a straight line up and to the right. It's always these big divots, typically in between those high points that, if you smooth it out, looks like it was all up and to the right. I like to hear about that journey. I like to hear about the success points, the failure points, and how people overcame the odds where they almost died. To me, those are the big stories and typically the great learnings. And I think digging into those from operator to operator is where I think you and I can really help shed some light on lessons from those that are people across the spectrum can really benefit from.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It reminds me of something I usually say in turnaround situations, which is that your business is a bit like a stick, right? It bends a lot more than you think before it breaks. And I'm always curious, when with operators, I'm like, hey, what's the thing that you thought was going to break your business, but it didn't? And what's the thing that actually broke that you never saw it coming, right? So I think there's so many great opportunities to get really, really good learnings from these operators as we dive in. So I think when we talk about this, right, if someone's on the fence right now, right, if they're thinking about subscribing and they may or may not, what would you tell them to get them to subscribe?
I mean, look, people can make their own choices. I think if people want to know what's happening in social commerce, like what are the big, apex things that are happening, or what are the inflection points that are going on, we're going to cover that for sure. And we're going to have our hot takes. And I think the reason people should care about our hot takes is because we've been around the block about 20 times. And, having enough successes and failures to recognize what's going on and have a healthy hot take is helpful to most people.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Right. If you want to learn practical operating tips, if you want to hear amazing stories of success and failure, and you want to get the real verified information, this is definitely the spot to be. So I am so excited to be hosting this podcast with you, David, with your incredible background, incredible experience, and just really thoughtful questions. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
So, this is exciting. I think people are going to really get a lot of value out of the Verified Social Commerce podcast. If people want to know what operators are doing and how the world is changing right now, this is the place to do it. Peter, I've always thought that there's a direct correlation between certainty and stupidity. And I think that challenging our assumptions, learning when we're wrong, like I used to have an energy drink company based on flavors. My favorite flavor is root beer. Guess what? That's not the most favorite flavor of anybody in the world. And so I learned to be wrong right away. And I learned it's fine to be wrong. Just figure out what's right. That's what I think we're doing here in a way. So if people want to subscribe to Verified and listen to the Verified podcast, where are they going to find it?
Right. They can find us on any platform where they typically listen, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, which is where I will be listening. You can also find us on YouTube and on socialcommercenews.com.
Check out Verified, get on Verified, subscribe to Verified. Let's make it happen.